we'll start the meeting if everyone's there. Right. You are, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Northern Area Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Sherry Jesperson, and I'm chair of this committee. With me as my vice chair, Councillor Mary Penfold. The officers that we have presenting to us in this committee today are Hannah Smith, Planning Area Manager, Ross Callaghan, Planning Officer, Hannah Massey is our lawyer, and we have David Northover and George Dare, who are our Democratic Services Officer. We were going to be hearing today from Planning Officer Simon Sharp, and he's had a fall and broken his leg, so I think we'd all like to send him our best wishes and wish him a speedy recovery. And Hannah is very kindly stepping into the breach. Members will introduce themselves when they first speak. So for visitors who've not been to a planning meeting, well, you've all been to a planning meeting, but for visitors who might be watching us live, I will very briefly outline the procedure. So we have a number of applications before us today, which we will consider in turn. For each application, I will invite the case officer to present their report and recommendations, followed by presentations by any other officers. The reports and background papers have been available for members to read and to discuss with officers prior to the meeting. After that, I will invite those members of the public who have registered to speak to address the committee. Please come to that small table there, and the microphones will pick up your voice when you start to speak. You have 3 minutes each only to speak. When we've heard from all the members of the public, I will close the public part of the meeting and no further interventions are permitted. Committee members may ask questions of points of clarification, and then we will move on to deliberate and take a view. I don't need to say my usual spiel about not being interrupted by members of the public, since on this occasion there are none in the room. They're all out in the sunshine, listening on their computers, and we can blame them. Would I just mention to members when you're speaking that the microphones are working very well, so people listening in will be able to hear us, but we don't have our table microphones today because we're in a different room. So for those of us who might be struggling to hear, or when there's a bit of background noise, can we all try and project our voices, look up, speak out, so that everyone can hear us when we're speaking? That's lovely. Thank you very much. So moving on to our agenda then, we could have our apologies first. George, David.
Apologies, Chairman, received from Councillors Hook, Fry, Jones and Parker.
Thank you very much indeed. Members, do any of you have any declarations of interest? The matters before us today. Mary?
I'm not sure whether it's a declaration of interest, Chairman, but it's just a point of clarification. My computer is not working, but I have obviously read all the paperwork and I should follow it on the screen.
That's lovely, very helpful note. Interesting how reliant we've all become on the computers. Members, can I ask you if it's all right for me to sign as a correct record our meetings of Tuesday the 14th of June? I'm seeing nodding all around the room. We'll consider those meeting minutes confirmed, and I'll sign them at the end of the meeting. Public participation I've covered, so we can move swiftly on to our first planning application. This is an application for homes for multiple occupation at Barnet Walk in Blandford. And it's going to be presented to us by Hannah Smith. Members, we have not seen an application for an HMO, or not for some time, so I thought it would be a useful one for us to see before the committee, so that we can reassure ourselves about some of the queries that have been asked by the Town Council on this. So Hannah, over to you. Thank you very much.
The application is in Blandford, 99A West Street in the centre of Blandford, and it's change of use of the first and second floors, currently offices, to a house in multiple occupation. which is a sui generis use because it's over the threshold of a small scale HMO. So the site's location in the centre of Blandford, as I say, but wrong, sorry. Okay, so yes, the application site is here outlined in red. You can see that there's a passageway that runs through the two retail units on the ground floor, which would remain in a commercial retail use. There's no proposals on the ground floor of the building. This is the first and second floor. The ownership of the applicant extends back into the walk here and this land here. So this is the front view of the property. It's a Grade 2 listed building situated in the heart of the town centre. Most of the buildings surrounding the site are also listed, various grades, some Grade 1, very significant buildings surrounding it. It has traditional sash windows and obviously contributes highly to the character and appearance of the conservation area. So ground floor we have here retail units, and then the proposals for the upper two floors of the building to be converted to residential accommodation. So there's some photos from the applicant's submission of the interior of the building, which you can see is sort of kitted out at the moment in terms of its former office use. Not a large amount of external features, obviously the windows, and there are some other features of the building inside. This application is subject to a separate listed building application for the minor alterations to the building, but there's no objection to that application. It's not before committee today. There's a couple of the planning officer's site visit photographs. I included this because you can see there are some interesting features in the building. And also this photo shows the slope of the roof in one of the areas quite well. You can see here, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. So this is the view of the back of the building in Barnard Walk, looking towards the rear of the property, which has been much altered there. There's only some minor additions, minor alterations at the rear of the building covered under the listed building consent, which would allow for more light into the habitable spaces of the building. So just talking through the constraints that apply here. The stars on the map identify the listed buildings. You've got the Crown Hotel here, and you've got significant buildings, Grade 1 listed buildings over here, and majority of the buildings around Grade 2 listed. Also completely covered by the conservation area, so it's within the conservation area. Designated asset also. You can see the relationship to the site is very good in terms of sustainability. You've got the marketplace here. They're in walking distance to all the facilities, doctor surgeries, job opportunities and so on that Blandford has to offer. So I've just put this map here just to discuss quickly the flood issues here. So the area is protected by the Environment Agency flood protections, which you can just see outlined here. But the site is within the high risk zone for fluvial flooding from the Stour. The application is a change of use, so the sequential and the exception test wouldn't apply to this case, and it's for the upper floors of the building. So it's not considered to be a concern in this respect in terms of flooding issues. So this is the existing plan of the building here. You can see the frontage of the building and no changes here, as I've shown before, and the existing and the proposed ground floor area. So it's a bit small. Just go on to the next plans, which I've enlarged slightly, so hopefully you can see. This is the first floor plan, and you can see the proposed small amount of changes that are required to include some stud walls to provide 4 studios at first floor level. So this studio here has its own ensuite shower room, and so does this studio here. These 2 studios would share this sink and shower and toilet. So that's the accessibility for that floor here. The second floor, this studio has its own shower and toilet and wash facility. These 2 studios would share this facility here, so they have access between the 2 studios to the shower, toilet and wash basin. I've got to talk about the requirements under environmental health later, but just to bear in mind, that's the proposed layout of the building here. So there's a shared kitchen, which under licensing, it's okay as long as it's not more than one floor away. So there isn't a kitchen on the first floor proposed, but there is a kitchen area of some size on the second floor. So just talking through the town council raised some material planning considerations that legitimately were of a concern to them. One of them being the space standards for dwellings. The space standards apply to dwelling houses and flats where not houses in multiple occupation. And houses in multiple occupation have prescribed standards that are set out, and that's controlled by environmental health. So I'm just going to run through quickly to give some reassurance the types of measures licensing will require should committee grant a change of use of the building, the principle of being okay there. The committee are satisfied that that be acceptable use of the building. It'd have to still go through the process of licensing before the building could be occupied. So the licensing, there's national government standards on HMOs. They cover fire precautionary facilities, heating, washing facilities, and kitchens. I've just outlined some of the requirements that apply there. There also will be building regulation that feeds into this as well, but this is the environmental health licensing requirements. And you could just read them through briefly. There needs to be appropriate fire precautions, and that was one of the concerns that the town council raised, rightly so, that there should be correct and robust fire measures in place. So this would be dealt with by the licensing. Heating as well as a requirement. Washing facilities, it goes into a lot of detail about access to wash basins and ratios depending on occupancy and the size of the unit. So I just ran through on the proposed where there would be access in those rooms to a wash basin and shower, and then the other rooms that don't have dedicated ensuite, there would be access to a facility for them. Kitchens again, the exact size of the kitchen wasn't identified on the plan, but there's some reassurance that environmental health will look in much more detail than we can about the kitchen facilities. They not only look at the floor area, they also look at the available worktop area and storage facilities, so that there's enough area in the kitchen to enable the people living in there to properly store their food and to access sufficient cooking facilities. So this is the mandatory requirements in licensable HMOs for sizes. And broadly looking at this, you can see that between 4.65 and 6.51, you can have a person up to 10. So for one person aged under 10. So for adults, the minimum size is 6.52 to 10.21. And then for one or two persons, it's more than 10.2. You need a greater area. And looking back at, I can go back in a minute, but all of the four areas shown in there would be compatible with that, depending on the licensing and how many they're allowed to occupy, how many people they're allowed to occupy each room. We also have some local, to give further reassurance, we also have some locally adopted standards for HMOs in Dorset, and these cover natural light. There must be sufficient natural light, and that's why there's some minor alterations to the rear of the building to ensure there's natural light from either a door or a window into that space. There must be artificial lighting. So for areas inside the building, they must be properly lit like a building. There's no reason why this couldn't be achieved. It's been used as an office, so it has a degree of lighting in it already. Ventilation, there must be sufficient ventilation, and water supply, there must be hot and cold water supply to the building, which shouldn't be too much of a problem because it's already sort of converted to a use. I put these two in more detail because refuse storage is something we may look to condition sometimes under the planning application. But under our licensing requirement, there's a stipulation that there needs to be a maintained area suitable for the storage and refuse bins and recycling bins to be stored outside the building. And cited so as to be readily accessible to the occupiers and to the council's refuse collectors. I did contact the applicant's agent and just clarified that in the ownership in the blue line, there is an existing bin area which served the office block, which would be available for this use should it get through the licensing stage. And then the final thing, the floor areas for letting. This is just a point going back to the sloping ceiling in one of the rooms. In calculating the total floor area in any room, any area of floor where the ceiling height is less than 1.5 metres from the floor shall be excluded from the calculation. And of the remaining floor area, at least half has to be at least 2.1 metres to the ceiling directly overhead. So you can see on the proposed layout that the sloping area is a passageway between the two units. So it's already, the layout's already taken account of that requirement. So in terms of the key planning issues, the area is in its highly sustainable location and the development contribute to the vitality of the town centre. There's policies in the North Dorset local plan and in the Maid neighbourhood plan that support the use of upper floors for residential use. The Blandford neighbourhood plan specifies that it should be residential flat. It doesn't specifically mention HMOs, but they are a residential use, and there is a significant need for smaller units of this nature. So officers have concluded that there's not a direct conflict with the aims of the neighbourhood plan in that respect, not because it's silent on HMOs. We don't feel that it necessarily precludes them from that residential mix. Sufficient natural light would be afforded to all rooms, no harm to heritage assets or to the conservation area. National space standards do not apply to HMOs, although this is controlled through licensing requirements. Environmental health have raised no concerns at this stage, subject to the full licensing process. And fire safety regulations are dealt with by building regulations and through licensing requirements. So moving on to the recommendation, which is to grant subject to the two standard conditions that you can see on the screen. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. That was a most comprehensive and actually very, very interesting presentation. So thank you for that. We're next going to hear from the agent, Mr. Holmes. If you'd like to. It's lovely. Thank you very much.
Chairman, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Holmes. I'm from Spruce Town Planning. As the planning officer has explained, this site is in a sustainable location in Blandford Town Centre. It is therefore an appropriate location for new residential development in accordance with Policy 6 of your local plan. Residential use of upper floors of buildings within the town centre is also supported by Policy 8 of the Blandford Neighbourhood Plan. The proposals are therefore acceptable as a matter of principle. The applicant has been in discussion with officers at the council and we consider that there will be a strong demand for this type of accommodation in this location. The building is Grade 2 listed and we've been careful in designing the scheme to ensure that the alterations to the building are minimal. We met with the planning officer at the site early in the application process and made some minor changes to the scheme in response to his subsequent advice. The separate application for listed building consent for the alterations has already been approved, and that aspect of the proposals is therefore also considered acceptable. We are pleased to note that there have been no objections to the application from local residents. We note the comments made on the application by the Town Council, which is why this application is before you today, and which are in part that the accommodation falls below the 37 square metre minimum space standards. I know I'm repeating what the planning officer said. Respectfully to the Town Council, however, they appear to have misread the guidance in that the 37 square metre figure applies to self-contained flats, not HMO accommodation. Regulations for HMOs are different, and as noted in paragraph 17.8 of your officer's report, the HMO will require separate licensing and building regulations approval. Those separate licensing regimes will confirm the acceptability of the use also. Therefore, whilst noting the comments from the Town Council, I would suggest that the proposals make an appropriate use of this sustainably located building in a manner that accords with both the local plan and the neighbourhood plan. I would therefore ask that you grant the application in accordance with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Members, do we have any questions for clarification before we move on to debate? Yes.
Just one. John Andrews, councillor for Sherborne East. I would just like to clarify something. Adequate. What does adequate mean when they were talking about environmental stuff? Because I'm a bit concerned about the washrooms. Naturally, I expect that's one of the concerns of the town council. But adequate is rather a flimsy phrase.
Thank you, Councillor. It's adequate in terms of washings?
Yeah.
Or...
Washing, showers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is set out. I don't know if I put it completely in.
No, I think
it is set out in a significant amount of detail, depending on the nature of the HMO and the layout. You have to this, I have.
That's all right, as long as it's defined.
It's in terms of wash basins, you need adequate access to them. And in this case, most of the rooms have their own wash basin and shower.
Yeah.
And when they don't, they have access between two units to that facility of an ensuite type facility. That looks to me, and I can't prejudge the licensing, but that looks to me to comply with that. I don't think we can require that every room has its own wash basin, but when they don't have their own wash basin, there has to be adequate provision, which is set out actually in the licensing regulations.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on licensing, and that's
Yeah.
also say
As
that.
long as there's a definition of adequate, because.
Yes.
It's actually specified, yeah.
Yeah,
in detail.
it's a good question actually, because we are, as it were, handing a lot of our queries over to the environmental health and the licensing regime, which is quite proper. But it's not what we're used to. We're used to being the ones that are asking the difficult questions, aren't we? Councillor Hall.
Yes, sorry, Councillor Matt Hall, Sherborne. Apologies if I've missed this. Brain's been rather full of COVID over the last
Oh,
week.
well, welcome back. Yeah.
And I've not done an HMO before. Do any of the Dorset Council HMO standards class as material considerations?
Yes, some of them will be material considerations. So if at the planning stage there wasn't sufficient light, for instance, in a room, that could be a grounds to refuse permissions, because we're still looking at whether it's habitable or not. So yes, they definitely can be material. So in this instance, I haven't actually said this in my presentation, so thank you for raising this. Each unit does have access to natural light, so it hasn't raised any concerns from a planning point of view in terms of ventilation, natural light, those kind of aspects. So they can be material considerations, but at the same time, we don't need to prescribe or condition aspects of the application that are dealt with by other legislation.
Okay, so I've got some other questions which you
Carry on.
just want to say. Or
Yeah.
I presume this is a bed sit HMO, not a shared living space HMO, because the standards are different. It didn't seem to be clear to me which one. Am I right in that?
You're right in that in terms of their shared facilities, but they're not all bed sits in terms of self-contained, that they've all got a kitchen in them. So they share the kitchen area. And I can't definitely tell you what category they'd fall into. But either way, they could meet the standards depending on, because the floor areas include some living accommodation within the unit itself. So it's sort of a bed sit type arrangement with a shared kitchen. I did look at the regulations and I know what you're referring to, because I know that there's one that's a shared space one that has different requirements, but all the floor areas could be compatible with this depending on what the license in terms of occupancy.
Yes, it does.
I'm with that one. Yes.
Yes.
The kitchen,
Yeah.
because there's no measurement assurance on that, because again, depending on how many people are in the property, depends on how many sinks have to be provided, how many areas for cooking, etc. And it just looks very small to me.
Yeah.
Such a large amount of people.
Yeah, that is something that Environmental Health have already flagged up in their response to the applicant, because there wasn't they will have to be satisfied when they come for the licensing that it is large enough that it can get the amount of sinks required and, like I said, storage area. From a planning point of view, I think a kitchen of a size is provided, and I don't know if we'd want to go down the route that it should be a larger kitchen, because they won't be able to occupy unless it is sufficient through the licensing process.
Yeah. And finally, 2 ventilation questions. The bathroom next to the kitchen, does that have enough natural ventilation? Because the description didn't seem to suggest that it did to me.
Bathroom next to the kitchen. It has a window to it.
So I presume that's an openable window, or is there mechanical ventilation in there?
I think,
Again, I'm sorry if this isn't.
no, that's fine. I don't think mechanical ventilation is proposed, because obviously we have to have regard to the mechanical ventilation. But I wouldn't say from a planning point of view that that room's not properly ventilated because it has a window opening in it.
Okay.
The licence will have to look at that in more detail, but from a planning point of view, it's, some en suites don't have any openings in them and they have to rely on mechanical ventilation. But I think this is quite well ventilated, I'd say, from a planning point of view, but I'm not saying that would meet the licensing requirements.
Okay, one which I hope, for my sake of speaking, that it is a planning one. On the first floor, the studio room, 12.8 square meters.
Yeah.
The windows being replaced by a timber door. But it doesn't say that the timber door will be glazed, and I believe the glazing needs to be 1/10 of the floor space. And I'm not convinced you can get a window in a door that would cover that amount of space.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something for the licensing. That's a good point because it does say that it should be, but that would be a matter for the licensing, I think. In terms of our assessment, it has, that could be fully glazed, that door, and that would provide that natural light to the studio area of that building. Whether that then meets licensing and the requirement for it to reflect 10% of the floor area, I couldn't comment on whether that would be a reason why the licensing wasn't granted or not. They may have to.
Licensing, we need a condition that doesn't actually say a glazed door or window in the door.
I think that's probably a bit onerous.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Planning condition.
No worries, thank you.
Very, very helpful. Yes,
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brian Heatley, Weymouth, Robert and Wyke in Weymouth. I'm struck by the contrast between the 37 square metres minimum space standards for such developments that in the Bramford Town Council mission on this and the actual sizes of these rooms. This may be an impossible question, but do you know what they're referring to with 37 square metres?
It's the nationally prescribed space standards set out by the government. So there's government standards
What?
for dwelling houses and flats.
for dwelling houses other than HMOs.
HMO is a specific use of land. So there's small scale HMOs which come under C4. Thank you. Thanks, Ross. C4, and then larger HMOs are sui generis uses of land. So they're not the same use class as a C3 dwelling house. So the nationally prescribed space standards relate to dwellings. So dwelling houses, flats, that kind of use class. HMOs are a separate use class and they have their own requirements in terms of space standards. So we couldn't require through planning, we couldn't rely on the government space standards to say every unit should be 37 square metres because that guidance doesn't apply to HMOs. They may look much smaller than you're used to seeing because they do look much smaller than dwelling houses, but they are a particular use type that's regulated in a way that's been seen to be acceptable in terms of the minimum standards.
Okay, so if I want to build a studio flat, for example, it's got to be at least 37 square metres.
If it was self-contained, yeah, and it was a dwelling house and it was C3.
Okay, I know
but that is a caution on that because some HMOs do have an element of self-contained units and they can still be an HMO use class.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Puts it in context for me because
Good.
I know a 22 square metre studio flat that's very nice.
Yes, good. Thank you.
It's only a very quick. It's Carol Jones, Sturminster Newton. Will a house in multiple occupation count as one on our target housing target figures, or could it count more if you've got lots of people in? I just wondered how that would reflect on our housing target. Could it be nice to add 7 more?
As far as I'm aware, it doesn't. It's not a dwelling house. It's not counted as providing towards our land supply figures because it's not a C3 dwelling house, unfortunately.
So it won't count at all?
Not that I'm aware of.
No. But what it does do, just to redress the balance, of course, if we allow it, it does provide accommodation for people who are very much in need of accommodation. So there is that upside. It may not help us very much, but it will help the people at Blandford. No, good question. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, Mary.
Thank you. Slight concern I have is that there is no lift re-fire concern, really. I just wondered if you'd be able to comment on that.
Thank you. It's a really good question. Yes, there isn't a lift proposed, and that would be very tricky in a listed building.
Yes.
Insert a lift. It's not an absolute requirement for upper floors that lifts are provided, but it will have an impact on accessibility and who would be able to use the units. So it does have that negative to it. But that said, we do provide, even through not changing the use through new builds, levels of accommodation, flatted accommodation without a lift on it. So it's not ideal, but it's not unacceptable at the same time. We couldn't refuse it on that point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other? Yes, Councillor Apothecary, is this a question? Please.
Sorry, I've got to find where I am now. Yeah. Sorry, my question is, do I presume that there are no, thank you, there is no requirement for car parking or even bicycle spaces?
Yes.
Thank you. It's really very good question. Yes, there isn't any proposed parking in this area, and I know we've discussed this before as a committee. I think we've heard how sustainable the location is, and the occupancy levels is likely to be very low in terms of each unit. There isn't allocated parking, but it is in the town centre, so you wouldn't necessarily need a car to occupy this development. And in terms of parking standards, there's not a requirement within the centre of town to provide parking. I know that can cause some concern. There are public car parks where you can purchase a permit. But yeah, it's a good question. No parking proposed, but it's not considered to be harmful in this location.
And no bicycle, no provision for, it would be difficult in a listed building anyway.
I don't think there's any cycle storage proposed.
No.
No.
Thank you. No. Any other questions? I did have a question then, if I may. It's in terms of the amenity of the residents. The windows of this property, the front windows will be, which are lovely big Georgian sash windows, will overlook the main road through Blandford, which is looking very busy here, looking very empty here, but is actually a very, it's not so much a busy junction, it's a junction where traffic stops and treads while it changes lanes. And the windows at the back are overlooking the back of the building. Are we sure that in terms of residential amenity, they've all got windows, and that those windows, when they open, will not be letting in inappropriate amounts of car fumes from the front, particulate, and from the back of the building, odours from takeaways and so on?
Thank you, Chair. That's a really good question. I think inevitably within the town centre, there will be some impact through noise and potential odours from being in a town centre location. I think that would be the same for most upper floors that's converted. I think the difficulty being a listed building is what interventions you'd want to put in place in terms of secondary grazing or mechanical ventilation, whether that's actually compatible with the listed building. So I think it's fair to say that there will be some disturbance for occupiers, but not to the extent that they couldn't use their windows. There's no immediate fast food takeaway next door to the unit in terms of flues or anything like that. Around the back, there's close flues, because that can have quite an impact. I can't say there'd never be some odours, because when you walk through a town centre, you do get various degree of odour from that, but not to the extent where it's been flagged by environmental health as a concern in terms of levels of residential amenity.
Okay, good. I mean, that your point is well made, that, I mean, we're not used to seeing buildings like this made into HMOs right beside the road, but of course in cities, particularly London, this would be entirely normal, living in accommodation with Georgian sash windows. That Are there any other questions, or shall we move on? Anybody want to begin the debate on this? Councillor Jones.
I think it's a very sensible use of empty space. And I can talk about people that are desperate to live independently but can't afford the rentals, and it will just open up. You know, years and years ago, we used to have lodgers, didn't we? Well, I didn't, but I mean that you could lodge at a sensible rate, which
Into second as well.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I just think it's nice to see a prestigious.
If there's no further comment, I will put this to the vote. You're proposing and seconding the recommendation as put to us. Good. All those in favour? Any against? That's lovely. That is duly carried. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, and do rush for the water, Jack, while we swap over. I appreciate that it's very, very hot. Bless you, thank you. Yes. All change. Yeah. Yeah. You could have the tape actually, but still, never mind. Bless you, thank you. Right, moving on then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We're now moving on to our next application, which is a reserved matters application for 115 homes at Loddon 8 Lakes in Gillingham. You'll be familiar with this site because we approved it in outline in January. Today, we're asked to determine scale, appearance and landscaping only. I'll ask Ross Calhan to give us your presentation first of your report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Just a quick update. We received a consultation response from our flood risk management team. They've raised no concerns regarding flood risk or drainage that weren't already addressed and conditioned under the outline planning condition. So as the Chair states, this is a reserved matters application to consider appearance, landscaping, layout and scale following that grant of outline permission for 115 dwellings back in January this year. So here we have the location plan on the left. The current phase 2 application site is in red here, and there's approval for 90 dwellings highlighted in blue to the north. And the phase 2 outline also approved this access point location roughly here of the B3092. So this site is allocated for residential development as part of the Gillingham Strategic Site Allocation under Policy 21 of the North Dorset Local Plan. So the current site in question I've highlighted with the red star here. And this is the agreed master plan framework as required by Policy 21. So for the application site, it does indicate a highway route through the B3092 and then up to connect the phase 1 development, which has already been approved. And this master plan also includes the Gillingham Beat along here to the south, which is now under construction. And this is the agreed outline approved parameter plan. So as reflected in that master plan, the residential parcel for phase 2 is shown here in yellow with the SUDS features and open space beyond. And you also have that highway route through a meandering through as also envisaged. Here is an aerial photo with the the site marked red again. And as you can see, the phase 1 90 dwelling scheme is now being built out by the same applicant as the current phase 2 proposal in front of us. This phase 1 scheme has its access to the north from Addison Close. We have the Loddon Lakes private fishery here immediately to the west, and then the Brickfields Business Park further west. And to the south, we also have the River Loddon. The proposed development would still remain outside of this flood zone. So here are some photos I've taken of phase 1 being built out. The top left, you have the existing Addison Close junction from B3092. This is looking southwards. And then top right, you have the phase 1 junction. So you have a new white-clad feature dwelling on the left, and then you have the pre-existing Nexus apartment development here to the right. Bottom photos are taken throughout the main spine road of phase 1. And the current reserved matters designs were reflective a lot of the themes shown now in these dwellings. And this photo shows the phase 2 access location, and this photo is taking northeast across the site in question. And just some more photos from within the site. So top we have the southern part of the site back towards Brickfields Business Park here. And then we have a photo facing west towards the fishing lakes. The final photo is just taken back down towards the application site. So this is the proposed site plan reserved matters for in front of us. So the development parcel on Spine Road is shown. This also includes a plateau speed control measure as agreed by our highway authority, along with some pinch points and turns in the Spine Road that would reduce speeds through design. So our highway authority has overall raised no objection, as commented that the overall geometry meets their adoptive criteria and the guidance in manual for streets. Refuse collection has been considered along with the on-site parking numbers for cycles and cars, and they're all considered to be appropriate for this location. The dwellings would include secure cycle storage, and there is an outline planning condition that requires electric vehicle charging details to be agreed. So this plan just shows the areas of highway that the applicant envisages to put forward for adoption in purple or violet here, and also indicates the street light locations, and these are just marked here in the small red circles. This just to quickly show the southern section of the adoption plan by the access point from the B3092. So we're now back at the opposite northern end of the site. So this is where there would be another highway link through to the phase 1 scheme being built out. So we have dwellings here that will be turning towards the hedgerow to provide natural surveillance and a sense of arrival to the scheme. And the street scenes along the main spine route show traditional designs with an appropriate variety of building materials with a maximum height of 2.5 stories. Some dwellings also now have chimney features in key locations to add some distinction to these key quality areas. These street scenes are within the more contained central section of the development. Accordingly, they contain a higher degree of semi-detached and terraced and flat over garage units, such as this. But they still retain a coherent mix of external materials. And these street scenes are along the southern edge facing the open space. So you have a looser development grain of detached dwellings, and the three-story flatted building is by the B3092 access and would comprise affordable units. There will be a further retention of hedgerow shown on the inset photo here. On the basis of its size, the rear elevation layouts here are considered acceptable, and we now have the corner dwelling here turned, having its front entrance turned towards this area to provide natural surveillance. So the development overall would have a policy compliant amount of affordable housing. That would be 28 units in total. The layout has been amended to provide an appropriate dispersal of these units across the site. This includes 4 affordable dwellings along the main spine route. So the elevation designs here would integrate with the open market units, and a planning condition is proposed to agree all external material specification for the overall scheme. So turning to landscaping, this is again back up by the phase 1 connection. The overall scheme is now considered to provide a sufficient amount of street trees, bearing in mind the extent outline consent for 115 units. And we're back towards the other southern edge by the main open space, and this includes a natural trail area, as indicated here, and also shows the traffic calming measures in some more detail. And this plan is just to show just further northeast to show the rest of the open space. So the proposed local area of play location, or LAP, it's shown here marked in the yellow star. So this is a location near the middle of the site, so it's therefore considered acceptable. And here we have the specific LAP details, which would comply with the Section 106 agreement signed with the outline permission. And here are the details of the nature play trail, including its play equipment. This plan also shows the additional grouping of trees as requested by our landscape architect. The overall landscape management plan has also been amended now to meet the requirements of Condition 7 of the outlined scheme. So all material considerations are addressed in the officer report, and the recommendation is to approve reserved matters subject to the conditions as outlined. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ross. Very thorough presentation. We're now going to hear from first Mr. Five, the agent, and then Councillor David Walsh, the ward member.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Fife, Director with the planning team in Savills Wimborne office. I'm here today to speak on behalf of the applicant, Taylor Wimpey, in support of this reserve matters application for 115 new homes at Phase 2 Loddon Lakes. This follows the grant of outline planning permission earlier this year. Planning officer's report highlights that the reserve matters are consistent with planning policy and the outline planning permission, which in turn are aligned with the approved master plan framework. The detailed design will deliver a number of major benefits: a coherent new community across phases 1 and 2, 28 affordable homes within a layout that is gender neutral, 3.5 hectares of accessible and landscape public open space, safe and accessible facilities for children's play, and enhanced biodiversity in the River Loddon corridor. Significant work has gone into achieving a high quality of design that has responded to the helpful comments from all the consultees. The application attracted in principle support in relation to footpaths, trees, housing and environmental health. There were no objections from Natural England and the Environment Agency. On detailed matters, the applicant engaged positively with the council to agree a series of significant amendments. The provision of a speed reduction plateau to improve highway safety, revisions to the distribution of affordable housing to achieve an additional cluster of 4 affordable homes, the provision of chimneys on homes located at visually important points along the Spine Road, the reorientation of the house on plot 21 to provide more acceptable outlook and natural surveillance, improve landscaping, more street trees and in the public urban space, and improve tree clusters, comprehensive changes to the landscape management plan to improve outcomes for ecology, landscape management and maintenance. The scheme has the full support of Gillingham Town Council with one letter of support from a local resident. The applicant and the council's officers have worked hard to achieve a high quality design. The application is consequently recommended for approval by the council's planning officer. Whilst not a planning consideration, Taylor Wimpey is a 5-star house builder. This is the highest possible rating that the HBF can award and means that more than 90% of customers would recommend Taylor Wimpey to a friend. Taylor Wimpey has received 100% customer satisfaction on phase 1, reflecting the site manager's NHBC Pride in the Job Quality Award for 2022. The approval of these reserve matters would cement Taylor Wimpey's commitment to the early delivery of housing on all its land at Loddon Lakes. This is therefore an exciting opportunity to provide much needed new homes in Gillingham in a sustainable manner. I therefore hope that you can support your officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much indeed. I hear from Councillor David Walsh, one of the ward members for Gillingham. The other 2 ward members, of course, are members of this committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Don't worry, I'm not here to give you a long speech, but I could just say ditto, because you've heard everything I'm going to say, because I say this every time I come before you. And I know with Councillor Apothecary and Councillor Rideout how proud we are of the people of Gillingham, who, when this was coming before them, decided they were going to master plan what development came. And that was such a, without being patronising, a grown-up step. This was just huge in that these people had decided, yes, we're going to have this development, we're going to do it and create it how we know we need it in Gillingham, with the schools, with all the facilities, with the games pitches, with everything they needed, and they design it. When we had Sajid Javid, the then Secretary of State, in 2015, who held the people of Gillingham up as an exemplar nationally, saying this is how he wanted all community development to be delivered by the community. Now, it's great because I had to report a month later in a planning magazine that be careful what you wish for, because this had taken so long to come before us, because at every step we'd gone to the community and asked, what do you think? But it took so long that, as you know, we then lost our 5-year housing land supply. We now fight our speculative developers because they're coming in through the back door. And that's what really breaks my heart in this, is because the people of Gillingham decided what they wanted for their town. And they said, yes, we'll have this. We agreed this, but then speculative developers come in through the back door and say, no, we're going to challenge with this. And without your housing land supply or your housing delivery test, it's very difficult to say to people of Gillingham, but why is this coming when we said we'd have this? It's very difficult to deliver these things for the people, which is